Ukraine crippled Russian systems in Crimea with precision UAVs, neutralized 107 airstrikes, and shattered Russia's Sunumi strategy.
It was a whisper that pierced the silence of the night, coming from invisible wings. But by dawn, the skies over Crimea had clearly seen what that whisper had become. Ukrainian drones descending on the Saki and Katcha airbases were not just a bombardment. They were a strategic blow to Moscow's prestige in the Black Sea. This operation proved that no Russian base is safe anymore, and no radar is powerful enough to stop Ukraine's new generation drone swarms. More importantly, the illusion of invulnerability that the Kremlin had built in the occupied territories was shattered. Because this war is no longer won with just weapons. It is won with fear, with psychology, with the night. The metallic hum echoing through Ukraine's airspace signaled from the very first minute that the night of July 24th would not be an ordinary one. At 10:40 p.m., a Russian air assault began. Not merely a bombardment, but a loud confession of the Kremlin's strategic desperation. In a single night, Russia launched 107 attack platforms on Ukrainian territory, 103 Shahed-type kamikaze drones, and 4 Iskander-K cruise missiles. Many nights have passed during this war, but an assault of this scale and coordination had rarely been witnessed. But Ukraine was prepared, and that preparedness was not only based on physical defense systems, but also on intelligent command structures, electronic warfare units, radar coordination, and human response capability. The system that governed the night was Kyiv's intelligence placed in the sky. From the moment the attack began, the Ukrainian Air Force activated a multi-layered defense protocol. NATO standard radar systems detected the enemy drones mid-air. Then, short-range anti-aircraft units and mobile rocket batteries engaged. Electronic warfare units caused many of the Iran-manufactured Shahed drones to lose orientation through signal jamming, forcing them to crash. Ukraine managed to shoot down or neutralize over 90 drones. 1 cruise missile was destroyed mid-air, while the remaining 3 struggled to reach their targets and had limited impact. In short, Russia's assault on the skies crashed to the ground. This attack was not just a technical clash, it was also a psychological campaign. By targeting regions like Odessa, Mykolaiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Donetsk, Cherkasy, and Zaporizhzhia, Russia aimed both to hit strategic infrastructure behind the front lines and to instill fear in the Ukrainian people. But the strategy didn't work as it had in 2022. Despite the assaults, only limited damage occurred in 11 regions, and no casualties were reported, because Ukraine is no longer just defending, it is anticipating threats, simulating scenarios, and activating countermeasures instantly. This event demonstrated that Ukraine not only controls its territory, but also its airspace, and that it is strengthening its dominance in that domain with each passing day. If 90 out of 107 attack platforms can be neutralized, then a Ukraine integrated with fully equipped Western air defense systems becomes not just a shield for itself, but a strategic umbrella protecting all of Europe's airspace. That is why this night was not an ordinary air raid. It was the herald of a new era. The war in the skies is no longer just a game of defense. It's the first step in Kyiv's air dominance map drawn across the heavens. But the most interesting development was Ukraine's aerial operation targeting Crimea. On the night of July 23rd, the Crimean Peninsula became the target of an invisible army descending from the skies. The Ukrainian Armed Forces special drone operation struck the Saki and Katcha air bases, Russia's strategic heart in the Black Sea and Southern Front. These bases not only coordinated the combat capabilities of the Black Sea Fleet, but also provided air support to the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia fronts. But this time, Ukraine's high-precision drones pierced the chest of the very hubs Russia considered untouchable. The operational structure of the attack was remarkable. Ukraine did not focus on a single target. This was a chain operation. That same night, heavy drone traffic was also recorded around the Belbek base, in addition to Katcha and Saki. Simultaneously, radar emissions were detected in Jankoy, Krasnoperekopsk, and Rozdolne. Ukrainian aerial intelligence analyzed these signals and launched pinpoint attacks on the weak spots in Russian defense. The drones used were far more advanced than traditional FPV kamikaze models. Some carried electronic jamming devices, while others conducted radar signal suppression. In short, this was not just an airstrike, it was an aerial operation supported by electronic warfare. Katcha Airbase was particularly notable. According to satellite imagery, most of the Mi-8 and K-52 helicopters stationed there were in open areas, and Ukraine capitalized on this vulnerability. Around 2:10 a.m., a series of intense explosions erupted over the base. The panic of Russian forces and their deployment of helicopters for night flights was a clear sign of lost control. These so-called masters of the sky tried to escape at low altitudes, but some were shot down, others damaged. Eyewitnesses confirmed that helicopter wreckage had fallen near residential areas in Katcha. The attack on Saki was more strategically focused. Radar towers, communication stations, and command centers were targeted. Ukraine coordinated the drones sent to this base using delayed timing algorithms. The first wave was used to identify defense systems, while the second and third waves directly targeted central infrastructure. This synchronization reflected a level of operational planning executed with Western-style precision. This operation brought two critical outcomes. First, it reminded Russia once again that Crimea is not untouchable. Second, it temporarily paralyzed the air support capacity of the Black Sea Fleet. This wasn't just a loss of ammunition, it created a hole in Russia's air superiority strategy. Furthermore, the fact that the attacks solely targeted military infrastructure demonstrated once more Ukraine's capability to conduct warfare in accordance with international law. This operation shows that Kyiv is not merely responding, it is planning, executing, and achieving effective results. The skies over Crimea are no longer safe for Russia. No one knows which radar will be knocked out next or which runway will explode. The sky is being rewritten in Ukraine's favor. On another front, Russia's months-long offensive strategy in the Sumy direction has finally shown signs of collapse. But this collapse did not happen on its own. After months of defensive and reconnaissance operations in the Sumy region, Ukraine launched a major counteroffensive on the morning of July 24th. This operation, which took place in the rural Kindrativka area, was not just a military success. It marked the beginning of a psychological breaking point. The operation was much more than a traditional counterattack. The Ukrainian defense forces had observed for weeks that Russian assault battalions were advancing along the same axis and created an attrition corridor along this line. Around Andriivka, the need for Russian infantry units to proceed without GPS coordination created major vulnerabilities. According to satellite and drone data, Russian units frequently moved toward incorrect coordinates and suffered heavy losses when detected. Ukraine turned this weakness into an operational advantage. At 4:30 a.m. on July 24th, HIMARS batteries simultaneously launched high-precision missiles at Russian command centers on the southwestern edge of Kindrativka. At the same time, FPV drone swarms, especially DJ-180 attack drones, were directed at the artillery batteries stationed in the area. This dual strike collapsed Russia's defense coordination. The weakening of the command chain left frontline units without leadership. Ukraine quickly exploited the gap. The 92nd Mechanized Brigade and the 71st Airborne Assault Brigade launched a pincer movement from the east and north of Kindrativka. These units were supported not only by artillery, but also by reconnaissance drone teams from the 3rd Division. Thanks to advanced night vision systems, the operation continued uninterrupted until morning. During the clashes, Ukrainian forces advanced building by building. Russian units began abandoning their fortifications. Especially the deserted ammunition depots presented Ukraine with a chaotic and irregular defense. This showed that the Kindrativka line was no longer strategic for Russia. It had turned into a symbolic holdout point. Some captured RF unit commanders stated during interrogations that the number of troops sent to the area was insufficient, ammunition was lacking, and communication systems frequently failed. These are not just signs of one area collapsing, they point to a general structural breakdown of the front. As a result, the fall of Kindrativka not only brought the Sumy axis within Ukrainian artillery range, but also signaled the failure of Russia's eastern offensive strategy. More importantly, this victory transformed Sumy from a passive border region for Moscow into an active threat axis. And the breach in Kindrativka may be only the first step in Ukraine's broader encirclement plans for the future. Now, all eyes are turning toward the regions of Lipivka, Bilopilia, and Seredina Buda, possible indicators of a second shock further east of the Sumy front. With its victory in Kindrativka strengthening the Sumy line, Ukraine turned the very next day to another front that would change the course of the war: Novocherkassk in the Rostov region. On the surface, this city seemed like an ordinary railway hub, but in reality, it was the main logistical artery keeping Russia's southern front alive. The coordinated drone attack carried out by Ukraine on the night of July 23rd targeted not just a railway station, but the beating heart of a nation at war. The direct hit on the Material and Technical Support Center was no coincidence. This center was the nerve point controlling the entire ammunition and fuel network, stretching from Rostov-on-Don through Voronezh, Volgograd, and Kamensk-Shakhtinsky. If a battalion was to be deployed to the front, the convoys were planned here. Every piece of ammunition had its route calculated from this point. Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking the coordinates of this facility for months. The attack began at 2:10 a.m. At least 15 drones flew in at low altitude, bypassing radar systems. The first explosion ignited fuel tankers. The second wave struck the ammunition depots. Post-attack satellite images showed a massive crater in the area and revealed that hundreds of square meters were rendered unusable. Communication systems went dark. Air defense batteries, still perceiving an active threat after the attack, triggered false alarms and collapsed their own signal chains. This was not just a physical collapse, it was a digital one as well. Additionally, the radio communications of Russian rescue teams dispatched to the area were intercepted by Ukraine and analyzed by cyber warfare units. Through this, Ukrainian intelligence discovered that officers stationed in Novocherkassk, in a state of panic, were desperately calling for assistance from other logistical centers. In short, Ukraine struck not only infrastructure, but the psychological core of Russian command. And perhaps the most striking element of all, this attack occurred in a highly sensitive region like Rostov. Rostov holds strategic importance not just because of its proximity to the front lines, but because it was the region where the Kremlin reorganized its security apparatus after the Wagner rebellion. The strike on Novocherkassk sent a clear message to Moscow: there is no such thing as a rear line anymore, the war is now inside. This development once again proved that Ukraine is not merely a defensive actor, but a force capable of infiltrating deep strategic zones. And the shockwaves of this blow weren't limited to Rostov. They were felt at the Kremlin's war planning tables as well. Because an army with weakened logistical lines cannot sustain a war, not on the battlefield, nor on paper. Now the question is this: if the Novocherkassk line is ablaze, what's the next logistical target? Belgorod, Bryansk, or perhaps the supply bases surrounding Moscow itself? Ukraine's next target won't just change the course of this war, it will shape the map of the future. And this map now stretches not only across eastern Ukraine, but deep into Russian territory. Ukraine's victories, both at the front lines and behind them, have accelerated the Kremlin's search for strength. But this search has now become more than military. It has taken the shape of a systematic and legal transformation. On July 22nd, a new bill submitted to the Russian State Duma revealed quite plainly that the Putin regime has shelved any possibility of the war ending. The proposed law cancels Russia's traditional seasonal conscription system entirely and lays the legal groundwork for a continuous mobilization regime throughout the year. With this regulation, every male citizen in Russia between the ages of 18 and 30 may now be called to service on any day of the year. The biannual conscription periods that previously existed are now obsolete. The current reserve force, numbering in the millions, could be sent directly to the front under this law. And the draft does not exempt state officials, meaning everyone is now a potential soldier. This development starkly reveals that the war's devastating impact on Russian society is not only physical, but sociological. The law effectively turns the country's youth into part of the war machine. According to official Kremlin statistics, 620,000 new soldiers are expected to be mobilized in 2025. But the real goal is to increase that number to 1 million per year by 2026. Statements from key figures behind the legislation, such as Andrei Kartapolov and Yuri Krasov, make it clear that this bill is not just a proposal, but is fully prepared for implementation. Kartapolov remarked, "This war may last 10 years. We must be ready," signaling the Kremlin's long-term vision. Krasov added, "The state cannot win this war without mobilizing the entire nation," outlining the broader picture. But the core truth behind all these developments is both simple and terrifying. Russia is not only struggling to send soldiers, it is running out of resources to replace the ones already lost. With over 1 million casualties and a society trapped in a wartime psychological state, this law is the harshest indicator yet that Russia has transformed into a nation-state trapped within war itself. And here lies the most tragic reality. This law doesn't just mortgage the present, it mortgages the future. In its quest to win the war, Russia is burning its own future. Just like the flaming railways in Novocherkassk, the nation's social fabric has now begun to burn as well. So what was the Kremlin's response to this depletion? To push harder, tighten further, and militarize even more. And this will trigger a chain reaction, not just internally, but in foreign policy as well. Because a permanent war requires more than just soldiers. It needs foreign support, logistical networks, and allies. At this point, all eyes turn once again to the north. The Kursk front will host the next chapter of this story. Launched in August 2024, the Kursk operation was one of the turning points that took the war far beyond the front lines. For the first time, Ukraine conducted an organized ground operation of this scale directly on Russian soil. The operation's architect, Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky, had stated at the time that the goal wasn't just territorial gain, but to create a psychological fault line. Today, that fault line has deepened, and the fracture continues. In its early days, the operation progressed with surprising speed. Ukrainian forces took control of approximately 1,300 square kilometers in the border region of Kursk Oblast within a short time. This area wasn't just a deployment zone for Russian military units, it was also a complex terrain where supply routes, ammunition depots, communication networks, and infrastructure converged. For Ukraine, gaining control here meant not just territorial gains, but plunging a dagger into Russia's inner front. But the Kremlin couldn't stomach this success. Special units backed by North Korea were quickly deployed to Kursk. A 12,000-strong group sent from Pyongyang joined Russian armored units in a counteroffensive. Intense fighting lasted for 3 months. Ukraine largely held its defense, though it was forced to withdraw from some areas. Nevertheless, the operation achieved its objective. Russia suffered approximately 80,000 casualties in the Kursk line. a figure that includes those killed, wounded, and rendered combat ineffective. At least half of the North Korean forces were neutralized. The Kursk operation shook the psychological balance of the war. For the first time, the Russian people experienced conflict on their own soil. In an environment where mortars exploded, power was cut off, and evacuations were carried out, the narrative that the war is only in Ukraine collapsed completely. Curfews were imposed in districts across Kursk, train services were suspended, and local governments were effectively handed over to military command. With this operation, Ukraine didn't just create a physical impact, it created a strategic one. It directly reduced Russian pressure on Sumy Oblast. Force redeployments to the Donbas line were delayed. The speed at which Russia moved units from east to west slowed, and most importantly, the myth of the safe home front was shattered. To this day, Ukrainian forces hold small but strategic pockets along the Kursk border. Through continuous reconnaissance flights, sabotage teams, and electronic warfare operations, they've turned this region into Moscow's soft underbelly. This is not merely an operation, it is a long-term attrition strategy. Every time Russia attempts to escalate on another front, Kursk serves as a reminder. And every time, that reminder sends a fresh wave of panic through the Kremlin's corridors. But perhaps the more critical development is this. Despite all these losses and psychological collapses, the Kremlin still cannot maintain its mobilization capacity. With every loss in Kursk, Putin is faced with a new question. Who will you send to fight the next battle? What we've shared today is not just a war report, it's a warning etched into the conscience of our era. Every bomb that falls doesn't just target a position, it targets the hope for humanity's future. But to stay silent, to turn away, to ignore it, that's where true defeat begins. If you hear this voice, if you're witnessing this struggle, take one step forward. Support this truth by subscribing, amplify this voice by liking, and become a part of this story by commenting. Because this isn't just the end of a video, it could be the beginning of an awakening of conscience. The more voices we have, the stronger our light will shine against the darkness.